A wealthy guest demanded the lowly waiter be fired. Moments later, the owner stood up and saluted him. The opulent Grand Thorn Hotel, a beacon of luxury and discretion, hummed with its usual evening symphony of clinking glasses, hushed conversations, and the distant, elegant strains of a jazz trio. In the heart of its most exclusive dining room, the sovereign, an air of tension thickened around table 7. There, Cassian Sterling, a man whose wealth was matched only by his arrogance, glared with unbridled fury at the elderly waiter before him. The waiter, a man named Arthur, stood with a slight stoop, his disheveled uniform betraying a certain lack of polish, his eyes holding a weary resignation. It was a carefully crafted tableau, a moment Alaric Thorne had meticulously engineered, observing the intricate dance of power and disdain he had come to expect. "You clumsy old fool." Sterling's voice, a low snarl, cut through the refined hum. It carried the weight of entitlement, an expectation that the world bent to his will. "Look at this. My suit, ruined. My evening, utterly spoiled by your incompetence." He gestured dramatically at a barely perceptible damp spot on his expensive Italian silk, a splash of water from a poorly balanced tray Arthur had momentarily fumbled. The water, a mere mist, was barely visible, yet to Sterling, it was an affront of cosmic proportions, a personal attack on his carefully curated image of perfection. "This is the Grand Thorn, not some roadside diner. I demand to speak with your manager, immediately." The words were not merely a request, they were an order, delivered with the certainty of a man who rarely heard no. Alaric, beneath the meek facade of Arthur, felt a familiar surge of cold disdain for such unchecked arrogance. He had seen it countless times in boardrooms, but its raw, unvarnished display here, over a drop of water, was particularly telling. Mrs. Beatrice Albright, the hotel's general manager, a woman whose every sartorial choice screamed ambition and whose smile rarely reached her eyes, materialized at Sterling's side with an alacrity that bordered on preternatural. Her silk dress seemed to glide, her movements precise, as if choreographed for maximum impact. Her face was a mask of practiced concern, a blend of polite apology and thinly veiled impatience, though her gaze at Arthur was sharp, dismissive, already having condemned him in her mind. "Mr. Sterling, my deepest apologies. This is simply unacceptable." "What is the meaning of this, Arthur?" Her voice, usually smooth and modulated, held a brittle edge, a subtle warning that Alaric, as Arthur, was well acquainted with by now. She was a woman who prioritized appearance and profit above all else, a stark reflection of the very values Alaric now sought to root out. Arthur, or rather, Alaric Thorne, the true architect of this grand establishment and an empire vast beyond most imaginations, felt a familiar weariness settle over him. It was a weariness born not of physical exertion, but of the relentless charade, the constant witnessing of human nature at its most venal. He met Mrs. Albright's gaze, then Cassian Sterling's. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk played on his lips, hidden by the shadow of his carefully constructed persona. The game, he knew, was almost over. The final piece was falling into place. He had seen enough. He had endured enough. "I believe," Alaric stated, his voice a low rumble, devoid of its usual power, still cloaked in Arthur's meekness, a carefully controlled tremor in his tone, "that the game is over." The words were ambiguous enough to be dismissed as an old man's ramblings, but for Alaric, they held the weight of a decree. Cassian Sterling scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips, his initial shock giving way to renewed contempt. "Game? What game, old man? The game where you get fired, perhaps?" "Mrs. Albright, I insist. This person is a disgrace to your establishment. He needs to be removed. Permanently." The emphasis on person was a deliberate dehumanization, a stark illustration of Sterling's belief in a rigid hierarchy where those who served were inherently lesser. Mrs. Albright's lips thinned. Her internal calculations were swift. Sterling's patronage, his influence, outweighed any concern for a disposable employee. The cost-benefit analysis was clear. "Arthur, you heard Mr. Sterling. This is your last warning." One more misstep and she paused, her eyes flickering towards Sterling, then back to Alaric, a moment of theatrical hesitation. "No, Mr. Sterling is right. The integrity of the sovereign cannot be compromised. Arthur, your services are no longer required. You are dismissed." The words were delivered with a cold finality, a practiced ease that spoke volumes about her priorities. She believed she was simply exercising due diligence, protecting the hotel's image, but Alaric knew it was a betrayal of its very soul. Alaric Thorne simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that, to the casual observer, seemed like defeat. The slight slump of his shoulders, the downcast eyes, all played into the narrative of a humbled, broken man. But to an omniscient observer, one could see the glint of steel in his eyes, the subtle tightening of his jaw that spoke not of despair, but of a plan reaching its inevitable, precise conclusion. The very air around him, to those who truly paid attention, seemed to crackle with a suppressed energy. He glanced around the room, his gaze sweeping over the diners, their faces a mixture of fleeting curiosity and polite indifference, the staff, their expressions ranging from discomfort to quiet schadenfreude, and finally, settling on a quiet, veteran waiter, Silas Finch, who stood nearby, a look of profound discomfort and sympathy etched on his kind face. Silas was the one constant, the beacon Alaric had sought. The stage was set. The final act was about to begin. *******. The events leading to this dramatic evening had been meticulously orchestrated, a testament to Alaric Thorne's unparalleled strategic mind, even at the age of 72. For decades, Alaric had built an empire, brick by painstaking brick, from a single small inn into a global hotel chain and real estate conglomerate. He remembered the early days, the worn ledger books, the late nights polishing silver, the genuine smiles exchanged with guests, the pride in providing comfort and service. The Thorne name, then, was synonymous with authentic hospitality, built on trust and a deep respect for both patrons and employees. He had envisioned a legacy built on warmth and integrity, not just profit. He had poured his very essence into it, seeing his hotels not merely as buildings, but as living, breathing entities, each with a heart and soul. He had amassed a fortune that few could fathom, yet in his twilight years, the wealth felt hollow, coated in a bitter film of disillusionment. The very foundation he had laid seemed to have eroded, replaced by something cold and transactional. His frustration stemmed primarily from two sources: the high-stakes business world he navigated, and, perhaps more painfully, his own family. Alaric had watched, with increasing dismay, as the pursuit of profit eclipsed all other virtues. He remembered the shift, subtle at first, then increasingly overt. Integrity became a negotiable commodity, something to be sacrificed on the altar of the quarterly report. Genuine human connection, the bedrock of his initial vision, was sacrificed at the altar of the balance sheet. He saw cutthroat deals, predatory takeovers justified by vague notions of market efficiency, and a blatant disregard for the well-being of employees, all masked by corporate jargon and slick presentations. The industry he had shaped, once founded on true hospitality and service, seemed to have devolved into a cold, transactional machine, where people were mere cogs, and profit was the only true deity. He often found himself staring out of his penthouse office window, the glittering cityscape a monument to his success, yet feeling a profound emptiness. What was the point of all this, if the very values he cherished were being trampled underfoot? But it was his family that truly broke his spirit. His two children, well into middle age, and his grandchildren, all beneficiaries of his immense success, had transformed into caricatures of greed. He had observed their interactions during Sunday dinners, the strained laughter, the thinly veiled attempts to curry favor, their eyes constantly assessing, calculating. He saw their constant jockeying for position in his will, their thinly disguised contempt for anyone not of their elevated social standing, for anyone who wasn't useful to their aspirations. He saw through their forced smiles, their superficial displays of affection, recognizing the avarice that gleamed in their eyes, mirroring the predatory glint he often saw in the eyes of his business rivals. They spoke of legacy, but what they truly craved was inheritance. They spoke of respect, but they only respected power and money. They debated his health, not out of genuine concern, but out of a morbid anticipation of the day his fortune would be theirs. His son, Robert, a man who had never worked a day outside the family business, constantly lobbied for more aggressive, less ethical investment strategies, while his daughter, Eleanor, obsessed over social standing and charity galas, seeing them merely as opportunities for networking and public image enhancement. He yearned to find genuine loyalty, an unblemished character, someone who valued humanity over material gain, someone who understood the spirit of the Grand Thorn, not just its ledger. He sought an heir, not just to his fortune, but to his values, someone capable of leading his empire with a moral compass, not just a financial one. The idea for his drastic masquerade had come to him during a particularly vexing family dinner, a lavish affair where the crystal gleamed and the conversation felt utterly hollow. His grandson, a freshly minted MBA from a prestigious business school, had openly scoffed at the idea of employee benefits, calling them unnecessary drains on profitability and relics of a bygone era. The young man had spoken with such conviction, such unfeeling logic, that Alaric felt a chill run down his spine. This was the future he had built, a world devoid of empathy. That night, Alaric had looked in the ornate mirror of his study, his reflection showing a man who, despite his immense power, felt utterly powerless to change the tide of human nature, to instill the values he held dear. He needed to peel back the layers of pretense, to see people for who they truly were when stripped of the influence of his name or his wealth. He needed to be invisible, vulnerable, to understand the true character of those around him, especially those he intended to entrust with his life's work. He needed to feel the sharp edge of disdain, the casual dismissal that came with low status. He decided to become Arthur, an aging, slightly disheveled, and seemingly inexperienced trainee waiter at his most prestigious flagship hotel, the Grand Thorn. The irony was not lost on him. He would serve in the very establishment he owned, observing, learning, and judging from the bottom up. He would walk the halls he had designed, clean the tables he had bought, and witness the daily lives of the people who made his empire run. His personal lawyer, a shrewd but loyal man named Mr. Henderson, was the only one privy to the full extent of his plan, tasked with managing his affairs, ensuring his identity remained secure, and preparing for the grand reveal. Henderson, a man who had seen the full spectrum of human nature through his legal career, had initially been skeptical, but eventually, seeing the resolute glint in Alaric's eyes, had thrown his full support behind the audacious scheme. The transformation was meticulous. Alaric spent weeks studying the mannerisms of an aging, somewhat out-of-touch man. He acquired ill-fitting, slightly worn uniforms from a second-hand shop, choosing fabrics that would wrinkle easily. He practiced a hunched posture, letting his shoulders slump, cultivating a slow, shuffling gait that would signify age and a slight lack of physical coordination. He even had his usually perfectly coiffed silver hair subtly thinned and disheveled, and his voice softened to project an aura of meekness, a slight tremor added for good measure. He adopted a habit of losing his spectacles, fumbling for change, and occasionally mishearing instructions, all designed to reinforce the image of a bumbling, well-meaning, but ultimately incompetent old man. He chose the Grand Thorn not only because it was his crown jewel, the physical embodiment of his legacy, but because its reputation attracted the very elite he wished to observe, the high-powered financiers, the socialites, the entitled scions, and the very staff he needed to assess, from the management down to the newest busboy. He would witness firsthand how his own management treated those at the bottom, how the wealthy patrons behaved when they believed themselves unobserved by their peers, and, most crucially, who among his vast staff possessed the rare quality of genuine human decency, kindness, and integrity. The experiment, he knew, was fraught with the potential for humiliation and discomfort, a daily dose of indignity, but for Alaric, the potential rewards, the discovery of true integrity, the knowledge that his legacy could be entrusted to worthy hands, far outweighed the risks. He had designed the perfect crucible, and now, it was time to put it to the test. Alaric's first few weeks as Arthur were a masterclass in controlled awkwardness. He moved with a deliberate slowness, occasionally fumbling a stack of plates with a clatter that drew sharp glances, or taking a moment too long to grasp an order, requiring a patron to repeat themselves with growing exasperation. His peers, for the most part, treated him with a mixture of polite indifference, subtle exasperation, and occasionally, thinly veiled contempt. Some of the younger waiters, fresh out of hospitality school, sleek and efficient, would exchange knowing glances when Arthur struggled with the cumbersome POS, point of sale, system or misheard a table number, their impatience palpable. They saw a relic, a man past his prime, inexplicably given a chance in a high-pressure environment where every second counted. The narrator, observing Alaric's controlled performance, could almost hear Alaric's silent amusement at their youthful arrogance, their self-importance. He saw their impatience, their focus on efficiency over empathy, their quick judgments, and he filed it all away for later consideration, a silent ledger of human character being meticulously compiled. He noted the way they competed for tips, the casual gossip about patrons, the subtle acts of undermining each other to get ahead. The hotel, from the staff's perspective, was a microcosm of the cutthroat world he had grown weary of. It was during these early days that Alaric first encountered Silas Finch. Silas was a man in his late 50s, with a quiet dignity that seemed to permeate his every action. His uniform, though old and patched in places, was impeccably clean, his movements efficient yet unhurried, a testament to decades of disciplined service. He had served at the Grand Thorn for over 3 decades, a silent sentinel of its changing fortunes, having seen managers come and go, policies shift, and the very spirit of the place subtly alter. While others often ignored Arthur's struggles or offered curt, impatient corrections, Silas would occasionally offer a quiet word of advice, a steady hand to help balance a heavy tray that seemed to be tipping precariously, or a discreet explanation of a menu item Arthur had momentarily forgotten, whispered kindly so as not to embarrass him. Silas's eyes held a deep, knowing empathy, the kind that came from years of observing human nature from the periphery, seeing both the best and worst of it. The omniscient narrator could see into Silas's mind, revealing his own quiet struggles, a sick wife at home, Eleanor, whose chronic illness demanded expensive medication and frequent hospital visits, mounting medical bills that kept him working long hours, and a constant, gnawing fear of being replaced by younger, faster staff who cost less to employ. Yet, despite his own burdens, his kindness remained an unwavering beacon, a testament to his inherent goodness. He was a man who understood hardship, and therefore, offered compassion freely. The encounters with Cassian Sterling began subtly, then escalated. Sterling was a venture capitalist, notorious for his ruthless business dealings and even more so for his demanding nature as a patron. He had a reputation for making staff tremble, for sending back dishes for minor imperfections, and for treating service industry professionals as mere extensions of his will. His first complaint against Arthur was trivial, a glass of water that was not sufficiently chilled. Arthur, in his feigned clumsiness, took a moment too long to rectify the situation, deliberately prolonging Sterling's irritation. Sterling, exasperated, snapped his fingers impatiently, a sound that cracked through the refined silence of the sovereign. "Are you deaf, old man?" I said, chilled. "Not lukewarm bathwater." His voice was a whip, lashing out at the perceived inadequacy. Mrs. Albright, ever vigilant for the slightest ripple in her carefully curated facade of perfection, swooped in, her smile instantly plastered on her face. She offered profuse apologies to Sterling, her words dripping with practiced deference, before turning to Arthur with a frigid glare. "Arthur, this is simply unacceptable. We pride ourselves on impeccable service here. See to it that this does not happen again." Alaric merely nodded, his eyes betraying no emotion, but the narrator knew he was cataloguing Mrs. Albright's immediate prioritization of a wealthy, rude guest over the dignity of her staff, her swift condemnation without inquiry. A week later, the situation escalated. Arthur, tasked with delivering a complex dessert order to Sterling's table, inadvertently jostled a passing junior waiter, a nervous young man named Kevin who was already struggling with a heavy tray. The resulting cascade caused a small dollop of creme brulee to land on Sterling's pristine white shirt, a mere speck, yet enough to ignite his temper. Sterling erupted. "You imbecile! Are you blind? Are you utterly useless?" His voice boomed across the hushed dining room, drawing the attention of every patron, who discreetly lowered their gazes or pretended to be deeply engrossed in conversation. "This is a custom-made shirt. You will pay for this, old man. And I demand you be removed from my sight. I want a new waiter, and I want him now." His face was contorted in a mask of pure rage, disproportionate to the incident. Mrs. Albright, her face a mask of mortification, rushed to the scene. She saw her carefully constructed image of perfection crumbling. "Mr. Sterling, please, allow me to apologize on behalf of the entire hotel." "Arthur, what have you done? This is truly inexcusable." She clapped her hands together, a sharp, dismissive gesture that underscored her impatience and annoyance. "Someone get Mr. Sterling a fresh napkin. Arthur, you are off duty. Go to my office, now." As Arthur turned to leave, Silas, standing nearby, subtly stepped forward, offering a clean cloth to Sterling with a quiet, "My apologies, sir. Allow me." His voice was calm, respectful, yet devoid of the fawning that characterized Mrs. Albright's tone. He then gave Arthur a quick, sympathetic glance, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice, a shared moment of understanding that Alaric cherished. Silas was not afraid to show compassion, even when it might be professionally risky. In Mrs. Albright's office, the manager's tone was glacial, her anger cold and precise. She sat behind her polished mahogany desk, her fingers steepled, her eyes fixed on Arthur with an unwavering sternness. "Arthur, your performance is a liability. Mr. Sterling is one of our most valued patrons. His satisfaction is paramount. You are on thin ice. Do you understand?" Her words were a chilling reminder of the hotel's true priorities. Alaric, playing the part of the humbled, elderly man, nodded slowly, carefully measuring his response. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." He understood, all right. He understood that Mrs. Albright valued profit above all else, that her managerial style was dictated by the whims of the wealthy, that she lacked not an ounce of genuine care for her employees, seeing them as mere tools to achieve her financial targets. He also noted her casual dismissal of his age, her assumption of his incompetence, the barely concealed irritation at his continued presence. The irony was palpable, a bitter humor bubbling just beneath his carefully maintained facade. She was speaking to the man who owned the very office she sat in, the man who had built the empire she so ruthlessly managed. Throughout these incidents, Silas Finch continued to be a quiet counterpoint to the hotel's prevailing culture. He would often wait until Arthur was alone, perhaps clearing a table in a quiet corner of the dining room or polishing silverware in the back, and offer a soft word. "Don't let them get to you, Arthur," he'd say, his voice low and comforting, a balm against the daily indignities. "Some people, they just enjoy making others feel small. It says more about them than about you." He often shared small anecdotes about difficult guests from his long career, moments of shared camaraderie that slowly built a bridge between the two men. One particularly slow afternoon, Arthur found Silas eating a modest lunch of a sandwich and an apple in the staff break room, a cramped space that smelled faintly of stale coffee and cleaning supplies. Arthur, feigning forgetfulness and a grumbling stomach, had forgotten his own packed meal. Silas, without a second thought, broke his sandwich in half, a simple ham and cheese on whole wheat, and offered it to Arthur. "Here, old friend," he'd said, his smile genuine, "a man needs his sustenance. You look like you could use it." Alaric, watching the genuine generosity in Silas's eyes, the unhesitating offer of his own meager meal, felt a pang of profound emotion, a warmth spreading through the cynical shell he had built. Here was a man who had little, yet gave freely, who understood true human need. Here was integrity, unvarnished and true, shining brightly in the dim, utilitarian light of the staff room, a stark contrast to the glittering opulence of the dining room outside. These small acts of kindness solidified Alaric's conviction. He observed how Silas navigated the demanding environment, always professional, always respectful, even when facing unreasonable demands from guests or curt instructions from management, never losing his composure. Silas never complained, never gossiped about colleagues or patrons, never sought to elevate himself by pulling others down. He simply did his work with quiet diligence, his inherent goodness radiating subtly through the hotel's often chilly atmosphere. He saw Silas quietly helping a new, nervous busboy who had spilled a tray of drinks, offering a calm word of encouragement rather than a reprimand. He saw him offering a kind word to a stressed kitchen porter struggling with a heavy load, or discreetly collecting a forgotten item for a guest without making a fuss. He was the moral anchor in a sea of superficiality, a silent guardian of the values Alaric once believed his hotel embodied. The culmination of the public humiliation came on the night of the hook. Cassian Sterling, having returned to the Sovereign for another dinner, was in a particularly foul mood. Word had reached Alaric that Sterling had just lost a significant, high-stakes deal, a blow to his ego and his carefully cultivated image of invincibility. His arrogance had curdled into outright cruelty, and he was clearly looking for an outlet for his frustration. He spotted Arthur serving a nearby table and, fueled by liquor and frustration, decided the old waiter would be his scapegoat, the recipient of his poisoned mood. He began to loudly berate Arthur for a perceived delay in his appetizer, even though the order had just been placed minutes earlier. "You are truly the most inept individual I have ever encountered in a luxury establishment. You move like a snail, you forget orders, you spill drinks. You are an absolute embarrassment to this hotel. Get out. Get out of my sight. I demand he be fired, Mrs. Albright. Now. If that decrepit old fool is still working here tomorrow, I will take my business, and my considerable influence, elsewhere." His voice boomed, designed to humiliate, to dominate, to leave no doubt as to his power. Every head in the Sovereign turned, the hushed conversations dying, replaced by a tense silence. Mrs. Albright, her face a carefully constructed facade of apology and frantic calculation, knew she had to act. The threat of losing Sterling's patronage, and the potential negative publicity he could generate, was a risk she would not take. Her career, her reputation, hinged on appeasing powerful clients. She marched directly to Arthur, her eyes cold, her voice a low, decisive hiss, barely audible over the lingering echoes of Sterling's outburst. "Arthur, you heard Mr. Sterling. This is simply the final straw. Your services are no longer required. You are dismissed." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of Alaric's meticulously planned test. The true natures of all involved had been laid bare, exactly as he had intended. The charade was over. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The words "you are dismissed" echoed in the opulent dining room, not just in Arthur's ears, but seemingly in the very fabric of the Grand Thorn itself. Cassian Sterling leaned back in his chair, a smug, triumphant grin plastered across his face, clearly relishing the spectacle of the old waiter's humiliation, his dark eyes glittering with satisfaction. Mrs. Albright stood rigid, her chin held high, a picture of unflappable authority, secure in her decision to appease a valuable client, believing she had expertly navigated a minor crisis, preserving the hotel's pristine image. She even allowed herself a fleeting glance of self-congratulation. But then, something shifted. Alaric Thorne, the man disguised as Arthur, straightened his shoulders. The slight stoop, the carefully cultivated sign of age and infirmity, vanished, replaced by an imposing posture that seemed to add inches to his height, imbuing him with an unexpected gravitas. The weariness in his eyes evaporated, replaced by a piercing gaze that held not meekness, but an almost frightening intensity, an ancient power stirring. The faint smirk that had played on his lips earlier now broadened, a knowing, almost sardonic smile that sent a shiver down Mrs. Albright's spine, though she couldn't articulate why. It was a smile that promised retribution, a subtle menace. Dismissed? Alaric's voice, no longer the soft, raspy mumble of Arthur, resonated with a deep, authoritative timbre that commanded immediate attention. It was a voice that had brokered billion-dollar deals, a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question, a voice that carried the weight of empires. Cassian Sterling's triumphant grin faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Mrs. Albright's confident posture stiffened further, a prickle of alarm rising within her. Yes, Arthur. Dismissed, Mrs. Albright repeated, though a tremor of uncertainty now laced her words, her practiced composure beginning to fray. Your performance has been consistently lacking. She tried to maintain her authority, but her voice wavered, betraying her. Alaric chuckled, a low, humorless sound that seemed to mock the entire scene, the petty drama, the misplaced authority. Lacking, indeed, Mrs. Albright. Lacking in insight, perhaps. Lacking in integrity, certainly. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over Sterling, then Albright, then the stunned faces of the other diners and staff, their whispers dying into an odd silence, before finally settling on Silas Finch, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of confusion and a nascent understanding, a dawning recognition of the impossible. You see, Mr. Sterling, Alaric continued, his voice rising, filling the room, each word perfectly articulated, carrying an undeniable gravitas, and you, Mrs. Albright, you have both failed a far more important test than any you could administer. He let the words hang in the air, pregnant with unspoken meaning, allowing them to sink in, to create discomfort. Before either could respond, their stunned silence broken only by the rapid beat of their own hearts, the grand, ornate doors of the sovereign dining room swung open with a theatrical flourish, as if on cue. Through them stepped a distinguished man in a perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair impeccably combed, his expression one of grim purpose. It was Mr. Henderson, Alaric Thorne's personal lawyer and confidant, his presence radiating quiet authority. Behind him, two imposing security guards, not from the hotel's usual staff but from a private firm, stood like silent sentinels, their watchful eyes scanning the room, their presence a clear signal that this was no ordinary dispute. Mr. Henderson walked directly to Alaric Thorne, bypassing Mrs. Albright and Sterling entirely, his focus solely on the man in the disheveled waiter's uniform. He extended his hand, not to shake, but to offer a small, velvet-covered box, an almost ceremonial gesture. Alaric took it, his movements deliberate, his eyes never leaving the faces of Albright and Sterling. He opened it, and from within, drew out a shimmering gold name tag, exquisitely crafted. He pinned it deliberately, with a slow, precise motion, onto his worn, slightly stained waiter's uniform, right over where the generic Arthur tag usually sat. The name etched upon it, in elegant, unmistakable script, was not Arthur. It read, clearly visible now in the brilliant chandelier's light, Alaric Thorne, owner and chairman, Thorne Global Holdings. A collective gasp rippled through the dining room, a wave of shock and disbelief. A dropped fork clattered to the marble floor, its sound deafening in the sudden stillness. Sterling's jaw dropped, his face paling, the smug triumph draining from him like water from a sieve. Mrs. Albright's face, usually so composed, so carefully controlled, drained of all color, leaving her ashen, a ghost of her former self. Her eyes darted frantically from the gold name tag to Alaric's now regal bearing, then to Mr. Henderson's knowing smirk, and back to Alaric, a dawning horror twisting her features. The illusion shattered with the force of 1,000 breaking glass panes, the carefully constructed reality dissolving into a nightmare. Alaric Thorne, no longer Arthur the clumsy waiter, stood tall, his eyes blazing with an undeniable power, a suppressed fury that had found its moment of release. For the past month, I have walked among you, not as the owner, but as a humble, supposedly incompetent employee, he declared, his voice carrying an undeniable authority that silenced the entire room, commanding absolute attention. I have witnessed the true measure of character in this establishment. I have seen the rot, and I have seen the light. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. Mr. Sterling, he turned his cold, piercing gaze upon the venture capitalist, who now seemed to shrink in his expensive suit, your arrogance, your cruelty, your utter lack of respect for another human being, regardless of their perceived station, is astounding. You demand perfection, yet you embody depravity. You call yourself a man of influence, but your influence is built on fear and intimidation. You believe wealth grants you the right to debase others. Sterling spluttered, attempting to regain his composure, his voice a pathetic croak. Thorne? You're Alaric Thorne? This is some kind of sick joke. A publicity stunt. He still clung to the delusion, unable to grasp the magnitude of his error. No joke, Mr. Sterling, Alaric replied, his voice laced with icy sarcasm, cutting through Sterling's frantic denial. A test. And you, I regret to say, have failed spectacularly. Your investments with Thorne Global Holdings, your partnerships, your reputation, all will be re-evaluated. Effective immediately. You will find that the world of business is a very small one, Mr. Sterling, and word travels fast when one has alienated the very hand that feeds them. The implication was clear, chillingly precise. Sterling's world, built on his carefully cultivated image, was about to collapse, irrevocably and publicly. Then, Alaric turned his piercing gaze to Mrs. Albright, who was now trembling visibly, her carefully composed facade having completely shattered, leaving behind a terrified woman. And you, Mrs. Albright. Your ambition, your relentless pursuit of profit, has blinded you to the very values this hotel was founded upon. You dismissed a loyal employee, one who has served this establishment faithfully for decades, even though you believed him to be a bumbling novice, simply to appease a demanding, boorish guest. You prioritized the fleeting satisfaction of a wealthy patron over the dignity and well-being of your staff, over the very soul of this institution. You allowed cruelty to flourish under your watch, fostering an environment where a man like Mr. Sterling felt empowered to act as he pleased. This is not the grand Thorne I built. This is not leadership. This is avarice masquerading as efficiency. Mrs. Albright tried to speak, but no words came. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her eyes wide with terror as she realized the catastrophic extent of her misjudgment, the irreversible damage she had inflicted upon her own career. Her carefully constructed life, built on ruthless ambition, was crumbling before her eyes. Alaric then turned, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly, towards Silas Finch, who stood transfixed, a silent witness to the unfolding drama, his face a mixture of bewilderment and profound respect. Silas, Alaric said, his voice now imbued with a profound respect, devoid of any pretense, step forward, please. Silas, still reeling from the revelation, hesitated, then took a hesitant step, moving slowly through the stunned silence. Alaric extended a hand to him, not as a superior to a subordinate, but as one man of integrity to another, a gesture of profound equality. You, Silas, showed kindness when it was inconvenient. You offered solace when others offered scorn. You gave when you had little to spare. You stood up for the vulnerable when it meant risking your own position, when no one was watching. You, Silas Finch, represent the true heart of this hotel, the true measure of character. And for that, I salute you." With a gesture of profound respect, Alaric Thorne, the legendary magnate, brought his hand to his brow, a crisp, military-style salute to the humble, veteran waiter. The gesture hung in the air, a powerful, symbolic act that silenced every lingering murmur in the room, sealing the moment in the collective memory of all present. The true owner had revealed himself, and the tables had been irrevocably turned. ******. The aftermath of Alaric Thorne's dramatic reveal reverberated through the elite circles of the city with the force of a small earthquake. The news spread like wildfire, carried by whispers and smartphone screens, amplified by the sheer audacity of Alaric Thorne's masquerade. Cassian Sterling's fall was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours, news of his boorish behavior at the Grand Thorne, coupled with the revelation that the man he had publicly humiliated was none other than Alaric Thorne himself, became a cautionary tale in boardrooms and exclusive clubs. Alaric, leveraging his vast network and formidable influence, quietly initiated a series of strategic moves. Investment funds were pulled from Sterling's ventures, powerful clients discreetly informed of his character flaws and volatile temperament, and his reputation, once built on shrewdness and aggression, crumbled into one of arrogance and unprofessionalism. His phone lines went silent, his meticulously crafted deals evaporated, and his carefully constructed empire began to unravel with terrifying speed. He lost not only his most lucrative contracts but also the respect of his peers, which, for a man like Sterling, for whom reputation was everything, was a fate worse than mere financial ruin. He had believed himself invincible, above reproach, but he had fatally underestimated the power of true integrity, the quiet strength of a man who chose compassion over callousness. Mrs. Beatrice Albright's professional demise was equally, if not more, devastating. Alaric ensured that her termination was not just immediate but also publicly known within the tightly knit hotel industry. Her ruthlessly profit-driven methods, her disdain for staff welfare, her superficial focus on appeasement, and her ultimate failure to uphold the hotel's core values were laid bare for all to see. The news traveled quickly through the hospitality circuit, effectively blacklisting her from any reputable establishment. Her carefully cultivated career, built on a foundation of appeasement and superficiality, on sacrificing dignity for perceived gain, imploded spectacularly. She lost her prestigious position, her exorbitant salary, and the social standing she so desperately craved. The luxurious apartment, the designer clothes, the meticulously manicured life, all were products of her compromised ethics, and now, they began to slip through her fingers as quickly as they had been acquired, leaving her with nothing but the bitter taste of regret. She, who had prided herself on her acumen, her ability to outmaneuver rivals, had been outmaneuvered by an old man disguised as a clumsy waiter, a truth that burned her to her core. The irony was a bitter pill she was forced to swallow, alone in the emptiness of her sudden fall from grace. For Silas Finch, however, the fallout was a whirlwind of disorienting, yet overwhelmingly positive, change. The day after the reveal, Mr. Henderson personally arrived at Silas's humble apartment, located in a quiet, unassuming part of the city, not with a termination notice, but with an envelope containing a new key and a deed. Silas, still struggling to process the events of the previous evening, opened it with trembling hands to find he was now the owner of a beautiful, spacious house in a quiet, leafy suburb, a far cry from his cramped, rented flat that had been a constant source of worry. Along with it came a substantial financial bonus, a sum so generous it brought tears to his eyes, enough to comfortably cover his wife Eleanor's mounting medical bills and secure their future, lifting a crushing weight from his shoulders that he had carried for years. His wife, frail but smiling, wept tears of joy, a sight that moved Silas deeply. But the greatest shock came when Alaric Thorne himself requested Silas's presence. In a private meeting, held not in an opulent office but in a quiet, comfortable lounge in the hotel, Alaric offered Silas the newly created position of Director of Hotel Operations, overseeing all staff management and guest relations across the Grand Thorn chain. Silas, Alaric had said, his eyes warm with genuine respect, you possess the rare quality of genuine leadership, empathy, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to human dignity. These are the values I want to permeate every level of my organization, every interaction within this hotel, from the kitchen staff to the executive suite. You will not only manage, but you will mentor. You will teach. You will ensure that no employee ever suffers the indignity I witnessed under the previous management, that every person who walks through these doors, staff or guest, is treated with respect. Silas, overwhelmed, could barely speak, tears welling in his eyes, the weight of the responsibility and the profound trust almost too much to bear. He, a humble waiter who had struggled for decades, quietly serving and observing, was now entrusted with a position of immense responsibility and influence, all because he had simply chosen to be kind, to embody the very values Alaric had sought. It was a reward beyond his wildest dreams, a testament to the profound truth that true value lay not in wealth or status, but in the quiet strength of one's character, the unwavering light of a compassionate heart. *****. Months later, the Grand Thorn Hotel thrived under its new leadership. Silas Finch, initially daunted by the immense scope of his new role, had blossomed, his quiet confidence growing with each passing day. His innate kindness and profound dignity had transformed the staff culture. Morale soared, a tangible sense of camaraderie and mutual respect now pervaded the halls. Service improved not through fear, but through genuine care, and the hotel, once merely a symbol of luxury and exclusivity, began to regain its soul, its original purpose as a place of genuine hospitality. He implemented fair policies, listened to staff concerns, and fostered an environment where everyone felt valued, from the dishwashers to the head chefs. Alaric Thorn, stepping back from the day-to-day operations, found a profound sense of peace. He had successfully navigated his empire through a perilous transition, not by choosing a blood heir, but by elevating a man whose heart was pure, whose values aligned perfectly with the original vision of the Grand Thorn. He spent his days in quiet contemplation, reading, engaging in philanthropy, occasionally visiting the hotel, not as the owner, but as a silent observer, a contented patron, watching Silas lead with the quiet competence he had always possessed. He saw Silas personally greet new trainees, his face kind and encouraging, offering words of encouragement, just as he had once offered Alaric a half sandwich. He saw him mediate disputes with fairness and empathy, always prioritizing the human element over rigid rules, finding solutions that respected all parties. The hotel's profits remained robust, indeed, they subtly increased, a powerful testament to the fact that integrity and compassion were not impediments to success, but indeed, its very foundation, building loyalty and genuine effort. Alaric Thorn often reflected on the profound irony of his journey. He had amassed a vast fortune, built an empire that spanned continents, but it was in donning the uniform of a humble servant, in embracing vulnerability and anonymity, that he truly discovered life's most invaluable treasures, genuine integrity, unwavering kindness, and the quiet dignity of the working class. He had sought to unmask hypocrisy, to expose the avarice that had poisoned his legacy, and in doing so, he had revealed the deepest truths about human nature, about who truly deserved the mantle of leadership. The world often celebrates those who achieve power and wealth, those who dominate and demand, but it is in the quiet moments, in the face of adversity and scorn, in the simple act of offering a sandwich to a stranger, that true character is forged and revealed. For it is only when the lights dim, and the masks fall, when status is stripped away, that one truly sees the light that resides within. Kindness, often dismissed as a weakness in the cutthroat world, as an inefficiency, had proven to be the most powerful currency of all, a seed that, when nurtured, could blossom into an unimaginable reward, far greater than any material wealth. It was a legacy built on the human spirit, and for Alaric, that was the greatest triumph of all. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. We hope you found this story of integrity, deception, and true character as compelling as we did. It just goes to show that the real treasures in life aren't always what they seem. If you enjoyed this tale of a hidden hero and a shocking reveal, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next captivating story. And now, we want to hear from you. What was your favorite moment in this story? Have you ever witnessed someone's true character being revealed in an unexpected way? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We love reading your insights.